16年
This is the Subcommittee on Public Health, Animal and Birds, Animal Traders, Amendment Notice, Commencement Notice 2016. Now this is such a long name, so I call to order this meeting, and we should now proceed to electing a chairman for this subcommittee.
根據在於內務守則嘅附錄。
Now, according to the procedures for election of chairman as set out in Appendix 4 to the House Rules, would members please make nominations now? A nomination should be made by one member orally and seconded by at least another member orally, and to be accepted by the member so nominated. Dr. Anne Chang, Dr. Elizabeth Quat. Any seconder? Mr. Gary Chan seconds. Dr. Quat, do you accept? Yes. Any other nominations? Dr. Chang Chung Tai. Ms. Claudia Mo. Anyone seconds? Mr. Jeremy Tam seconds. Ms. Claudia Mo, do you accept the nomination? Yes. Any other nominations? I'll count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have two candidates. Number 1, Dr. Elizabeth Quat, and number 2, Ms. Claudia Mo. If there are no other nominations, then the voting would be carried out by secret ballot. Staff members would now distribute ballot papers to members with CHOP.
當委員起
After members have affixed CHOP on the ballot paper, I will declare that the voting is closed and no more ballot papers will be distributed. Staff will proceed to collecting ballot papers from members. For members who have been given ballot papers, you must put in the ballot paper in the ballot box yourselves. Before you do so, please do not leave your seat. According to the House Rules, each member nominated would be given a candidate number based on the order of nomination, and please use the CHOP to affix a tick next to the name of the candidate. Candidate number 1 is Dr. Elizabeth Quat. Number 2, Ms. Claudia Mo. Since this is secret ballot, please do not show your ballot paper to others. And please also fold the ballot paper, or cover the ballot paper after you have affixed the CHOP, and there is no need to fold it. So we've altogether distributed 16 ballot papers. If you've already put the affixed the CHOP on the ballot paper, I now declare that voting is closed. Staff will stop distributing ballot papers. Are we done? So would the staff please collect ballot papers now? Would all members who have been given ballot papers please put the ballot papers in the box yourselves? And before you do so, please do not leave your seat.
好啦，收晒選票啦
So, have all the ballot papers been collected? Would Dr. Ann Chang and Dr. Chang Chung Tai, the members who have made nominations, please come up to the podium to witness the vote count.
嚇？唱我唱一唱。一號。
Number one. Number one. Number one. Number one. Number two. Number one. Number two. Number one. Number one. Number one. Number one. Number one. Number one. Number two. Number two. And last one, number two. I now declare that Dr. Elizabeth Quat has 11 votes. Ms. Claudia Moe has 5 votes. So Dr. Elizabeth Quat is returned chairman of the subcommittee. Please come forward. So do members think there is a need to elect a deputy chairman? If not, then we can move on to the next agenda item. That is meeting with the administration. So may I now invite the administration in. Members will wish to refer to the relevant papers issued as set out in the agenda.
Commencement notice 咁係嗰個commencement notice 咧喺呢度，其實就係呢一個，就指定3月20號，咁可以請佢哋
好啊，咁就請政府。
So would the administration please walk members through this Public Health Animals and Birds Animal Traders Amendment Regulation 2016 Commencement Notice. Who would like to walk us through that, please, Under Secretary? Thank you, Madam Chair, members. This is Public Health Animals and Birds Animal Traders Amendment Regulation 2016, and that is the amendment regulation was gazetted on the 20th of May this year and also tabled into the Council. In 2012, we conducted a public consultation, and the 5th term of the Legislative Council scrutinized the regulation, and it's been a few years. And there have been concerns groups and members of the public in the community giving us views and participating in our discussion and supported the government's proposal. In the amendment regulation, these views have been given consideration, and we have been striking a balance. A subcommittee was set up in the 5th term of Legislative Council and held 3 meetings. In one of the meetings, we also received 42 deputations and members of the public. And when the scrutiny period expired on the 13th of July, the Legislative Council did not propose any amendment to the amendment regulation. Sorry, speaker's not coming through. According to Section 1 of the amendment regulation, Secretary for Food and Health has already published in the Gazette on the 25th of November 2016 that the amendment regulation will come into operation on the 20th of March 2017. The notice has also been tabled into the Council. In fact, the AFCD has started its preparation for implementing the new requirements next year. And this is the commencement notice that we're laying on the table before the Council to appoint 20th of March 2017 as the day on which the amendment regulation is to come into operation. I urge members to support us. We have 3 members, in fact 4 members waiting to ask questions, starting with Dr. Cheng Chung Tai, Mr. Jeremy Tam. 4 minutes, questions and answers included. My first question is on 5A. That is for animal welfare groups. You are giving some exemptions. You have A, B, and C. And in short, I think that the majority of animal welfare groups can fulfill criteria A. That is registered under the Society's Ordinance, and also B, which is quite easy. And however, for point C, is whether employed by a registered veterinary practitioner, etc. Well, I think for the majority of welfare groups responsible for rehoming animals, most of them will not be employing a registered veterinary surgeon. The AFCD has given this a thought. Perhaps I would defer to Dr. Thomas Sitt to take your question. Now, the purpose of the exemption is that on the one hand, we do not want any individual to abuse this exemption mechanism. So if there is proof that it is a charitable organization, the AFCD may grant exemption. Perhaps Dr. Mary Chow can supplement. Dr. Chow, please. Please turn on her microphone. Yes. About appointing a registered veterinary surgeon as an advisor, we're not suggesting that this veterinary surgeon must be responsible only for this welfare group, but rather that this appointed vet could take care of sick animals, and that there are facilities available, and the vet could then check the conditions of the animals on the premises. Right, but the question is, the wording used is whether you have appointed or employed one. Well, of course, if it's a one-off appointment, then we can understand that. But from the word employment, you seem to suggest that there should be a contractual relationship. I want to clarify the use of words. In fact, we are suggesting that there should be a veterinary surgeon who is a regular, who has a regular partnership with the animal welfare group. So it doesn't mean that one must be employed by the animal welfare group. Well, that's one point. The other point is acting as the advisor for the animal welfare or the health of animals. So that's not the same thing. If the animal is sick, you may approach the vet for help rather than having an advisor. Well, perhaps you can follow that up at the next meeting. I have another question, in fact. As I said to the Deputy Director before, after granting the licenses, how can you make sure that the DMC of buildings would allow such practices? Because there is nothing on the paper that suggests that the applicant must submit a DMC of the building. So once a license is granted, the owners' corporation of the building may drive the organization away on the ground of a breach of DMCs. So how are you going to handle that?
Well, for the DMC, we have also looked into the matter. Perhaps the Undersecretary can answer. Mr. Wong, the Principal Assistant Secretary. Before, at the last 5th Legislative, when we were deliberating on the amendment regulation, and some deputations have also given such views. Well, we'd like to explain here the AFCD, according to the CAP 139 of the Fisheries and Agriculture Ordinance. There is also a mention of the DMC. If there is evidence that there is a contravention of the provisions in the DMC, such that the premise cannot undertake such activities of the license, and this will become part of the consideration for the AFCD when renewing such license. Well, you have given the license and there is a complaint. Well, do you know where he lives and where how the DMC would be? Well, according to the evidence, even for new license or for the renewal of license, we'll take that into consideration. Madam Chair, it is not within the content of the ambit of the commencement of the amendment regulation, but it is also part of the content. I would like to remind you that it is very simple for us here. It is the commencement of the amendment regulation. Since that it is a new LegCo, I think that we can also raise question here. However, if there is a far deviation from the content, from the substance of this meeting, I do not think that we should do that. For the commencement of the amendment regulation, at the last LegCo, we have had several deliberations, and there were deputations, individuals, and organizations who have come here. However, the administration is following its own way. Now, would you consider the delaying of the commencement date? Because we believe that we need now to listen to different deputations and individuals' views on the amendment regulation. Do you intend to delay the commencement? Thank you, Mr. Jane, for your question. I would like to invite the AFDC to speak on that. When we decide on the commencement date, we have already given much thought. There should be a buffer time so that the AFCD can explain the amendment regulation, since it has been improved. At the same time, there has also been information campaigns. Perhaps Mr. Sid can tell us the preparations for that. Dr. Thomas Sid. For the commencement date, the FCD have already made several preparations so that in the first quarter of next year, we will be undertaking training as well as information preparations, for instance, brochures and television slots. And we will also have consultations with the industries so that we can have appropriate training. And training material will also be prepared. And we have not encountered any difficulties in the recruitment of personnel needed. So I believe that by the beginning of next year, we will have enough resources as well as time for such preparations. For me, I would oppose the amendment regulation. However, since it has already been approved, but why is it that I would like to have a delay? I would like to know, well, for instance, if it is registration in the premise, a private premise, when you go for a checkup, you have to liaise with the management or the corporation, because you have to announce it beforehand. You cannot go just like that. So how can you solve this technical problem? Well, if for each checking you have to announce it beforehand, how good would you really need know what's going on? So with respect to this licensing, our aim is that the applicant have to let us in to check the premise as well as the animals therein. And of course, in this checking, we have regular checks and irregular checks. And for irregular checks, when we have an appointment with him, with the applicant, and he refuses, then we will have ample consideration of rejecting his application. Well, today, Claudia Mo, we are now discussing the commencement of the amendment regulation. However, you are well prepared and you have come in force. So you are prepared that we'll have questions raised here. We have new members, Mr. Tam Chung Ho, Mr. Jerry Tam, 159. Cap 139B. Well, you have problems with resources and personnel. You decided the commencement date to be January 19th. Now it is March 20th. And Mr. Chang Chung-tai would like to have a delay. Well, you are telling us that you are very well prepared as with resources and personnel. I have doubts on that. We know that the 139B, Cap 139B, has undergone negative vetting. Now, well, what you are doing is setting it out before approval. Then you can discuss it later. I doubt whether there is a certain appropriate balance being obtained. The Democrats now have a lot of different views, even in the public, within the for the public and for the civil society. There are lots of opposition to Cap 139B amendment regulation because you cannot really control it. You are now passing this through as a disguise for legalizing some private breeding. So in this way, you are sort of licensing it for legalizing it. Well, we will do the utmost to carry out the amendment regulation. We are repeating ourselves. In the last 3 years, we have already stated fully our views. First of all, this subcommittee should have another public hearing. Secondly, we have to consider the delaying of the commencement for a year or two. And thirdly, if that's not going to be done, if there's an outright refusal, then I will ask for a repeal of the amendment regulation at the Secretary. In the last few years, apart from public consultations, I've also listened to the deputation's views. Of course, I understand that some deputations are against it. Well, there's a huge majority. However, we also know that there is a majority supporting it. I do not agree that a great majority of deputations is supporting you. Well, according to our record, you are making up your own records. Now, there are lots of societies and deputations supporting us because there are a lot of problems currently existing, and the AIFCD cannot do much about it as of now. So the commencement of the amendment regulations will enable the department to carry out some work to improve the situation, and we have indeed obtained a balance. Well, you are now disguising the legalization of such trade and breeding. Well, since that it has been approved, and we will hope that we can respond to the demands of a lot of people and a lot of deputations. We also know that there are some different ideas. The AFCD are now fully prepared, and we have also increased resources and manpower to them. The commencement of a new regulation, when they apply them, they will also revise and make improvements as they go along. I would like to, Mr. Chen Chi-chen, now I would like to tell you about the real situation. We are now talking about commencement, a legal notice of commencement. Whether or not we will agree to have the commencement date for the March of 20th, 2017. Well, theoretically speaking, we can delay this commencement date. However, the reality is the 139B, CAP 139B, has undergone a negative vetting. So no real deliberations have been done. Since we have to take care of the registration of doctors. Now, it is said here that this has not gone under a revision. Yet, it was because we had no time to revise, and we did not have enough time for full discussions. Now, the administration, even if they have good ideas, they cannot revise this amendment regulation. So last year, I asked one of the officials who is not present here. There was not any full discussions or approval done at the last LegCo. So if you can also, he said that you could negated. Now, however, what we can do now is, if we have a lot of issues that we'd like to raise for the CAP 139B, the administration itself cannot revise it. They can only have some administrative procedures or measures to reduce the doubts of the public.
If you're unable to do that, then some members may simply vote against it or submit an amendment to delay the commencement date to 2047. And meanwhile, you can table further amendments. We do have strong views about this amendment, but we never had any chance to discuss 139B. Well, in fact, there was a very short discussion of several minutes when the subcommittee's work was to be extended for several more weeks in the Council. So divergent views were never discussed at the Council. Well, of course, Ms. Claudia Mo has suggested that another public hearing be held, but it doesn't really change this amendment regulation. It's just a chance for the government to listen to more views from the stakeholders, so that when the amendment regulation is implemented, it may help the government. So whether or not we propose an amendment to delay the commencement to 2047, and even if this is discussed in the Council, after all, we should discuss the amendment regulation. We should state our grounds whether to support it or not. We should be able to discuss that. Well, Mr. Ray Chan, you have described the procedures, and indeed we have reached this stage. And here, the subcommittee's job is to discuss the commencement notice. But I understand that there will be a subcommittee to discuss the issue of animal welfare. I think we all understand that we have passed the point to discuss the amendment regulation. But of course, you mentioned that you could make an amendment for members who are concerned about this issue to be able to discuss this at the Council meeting. But in fact, on this matter of commencement notice, I don't think there is really much to discuss, and it's really quite peculiar to hold a public hearing simply on a point of commencement notice. So should we spend time discussing something that we cannot change anyway, or should we rather strive for a subcommittee on the relevant matter to be set up in the future so that a detailed discussion can be held? If members believe that improvements should be made and other issues should be discussed, I think that the other subcommittee will be in a better position to handle these issues. May I be given? Well, I thought Mr. Ray Chan was asking me, so I'll just respond to you first, Under Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Ray Chan, for your comment and how you feel about this piece of legislation. As I mentioned just now, we have indeed reached this stage of our procedure that we are urging members to support the date of commencement set out in the notice. We have heard a lot of views from members, for example, whether the AFCD has sufficient time or manpower to conduct inspections, etc. In fact, the AFCD has made ample preparations. We have resources from the Policy Bureau. We have additional manpower to implement this properly. And I understand that we may not be able to make a big leap and achieve 100% of the outcome. So when the amendment regulation comes into operation, the director will closely monitor the situation. The department has made ample preparations, but if need be, they would make further improvements. As for other comments relating to animal welfare, I think we can deal with these comments at the panel or at the subcommittee due to be set up. The AFCD is a major stakeholder, so we'll continue to listen to your views. I just urge members to support this commencement notice. Dr. N. Chang. Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment regulation is close to the heart of many animal welfare groups and animal lovers. They have given a lot of views to the government. In recent years, we have seen a surge in the number of households with pets. And we have also seen a surge in breeding activities in these households. The puppies and kittens may be shared among different households, and this is quite common nowadays. And yet there are also some environmental constraints, etc., making such breeding activities unsuitable, and that is the background of the introduction of 139B amendment. Now, some members raised questions on whether you are legalizing such activities that are illegal at the moment. So by amending the regulation, are you in fact indirectly encouraging this practice? Well, I don't think this mentality works, because without any regulation at all, anyone can practice home breeding of pets. But now, with this piece of legislation, one needs to go through a very complex application procedures. And there are requirements to be met and standards to follow before a license can be granted. Many people would in fact be deterred. Well, of course, there would always be offenders who decide to breed animals without a license, but they risk the chance of being prosecuted, and they face some severe punishment, including a maximum fine of $100,000. Some members just now raised other questions. For example, whether surprise checks can be conducted. And I'd like to ask Undersecretary, is the department authorized to conduct surprise checks, Dr. Sid and Dr. Chow? Well, in fact, in applying for a license, applicants have already been told that they must allow us to inspect the premises. So once we knock on the door, and if we make known to them that we are from the AFCD, then they must allow us entry for inspection. So do you have statistics on how many such breeding grounds there are at the moment, and how many applications for licenses to expect to receive in future? Dr. Chow? Thank you, member, for the question. According to our surveillance effort online and the survey on the pets kept by pet stores, I think at least 300 to 500 based on pets purchased from pet stores vis-a-vis home breeding activities. So around 300 to 500. So how many license applications do you expect to receive? Would that be several thousand? because we have licensing conditions, and also the COP has already been uploaded online because we have tightened our requirements. We believe that small-scale animal breeders may be disincentivized to continue their practice. Madam Chair, I hope that after the piece of legislation is passed, the Bureau or the department can come back and report to their progress to us. And I stress that they must closely monitor the situation. They must not relax their effort. Mr. Roy Kong. One may recall that this piece of legislation was so controversial in the first place because there are breeding grounds, locations unknown to us, in which animals lived in cages, small cages, in very undesirable conditions. In the past, there were other pieces of legislation authorizing the department to do something, and yet nothing had been done. And it is controversial now because we see that these illegal breeding grounds or farms were neutralized, were detected and cracked down by animal welfare groups. And my question is this: after 139B amendment is enacted, how many manpower do you expect to utilize for inspection? Thank you for the question. I will defer to AFCD for more information, but I'd like to stress that we have increased manpower and resources for enforcing this amendment regulation. I'd like to know exact figures. Dr. Sid, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kwong. About 139B and enforcement on unlawful breeding farms, we have had cases in which we took active enforcement action, but we welcome complaints from the public. Depending on the number of licenses in different categories, we may deploy different manpower. For example, if we have several hundred individual breeders and breeding farms. Sorry, my time is limited. I'd just like to know when it comes into operation, how much manpower do you expect to utilize to conduct checks? The AFCD is going to deploy 30 staff members to enforce the relevant regulation. And as I mentioned just now, depending on the number of licenses, we are also going to conduct the enforcement actions correspondingly. Just 30 staff members, have they gone through specific training to, say, read DMCs, to check whether the premises can be permitted for keeping of dogs, etc.? Thank you, Mr. Kwong. Our staff members do have experience of license checks, and new colleagues would be led by experienced colleagues. Appropriate training will be provided. Sorry, Dr. said, because this is really our grave concern. This is a controversy because, let's say, if you have 30 staff members overseeing the whole of Hong Kong, and then again, according to your colleague, you expect to have 300 and 500 to 500 applications. But I am worried that the number could be far greater than that, because it's now been legalized, and yet you only have 30 staff members to conduct surprise checks, to read DMCs, etc. I'm very concerned. I know this is not a time to discuss this, Madam Chair. I hope that a public hearing can be held.
Dr. Chow. Thank you, Mr. Kong. His concern for the resources. As said just now, we have now 20 more personnel taking care of licenses. And we will have 7 new posts. These are added to the team for the licensing. Even though we might have several hundred applications, however, for each license we'll have a risk assessment so that we know how many visits are required. Within the administration, if we see that we are short of manpower, more deployment can be made. So once it's started, please do have confidence that we will obtain good results. Madam Chair, let me add. Mr. Kwong is concerned about the matter of resources. According to Dr. Chow, it is an initial assessment of the resources needed, and when it is implemented, we will also see the needs and will respond to the needs. Now, before licensing, there are standards that the applicants must reach, and the AFCD will only issue permits and licenses when they satisfy the standards. Well, once they obtain the license, whether the performance the level would go down, that will need inspection, and that will also need reassessment. Madame Claudia Moore, second round. I wonder if there's misunderstanding from Madame Zhang Laiwan. She had said that, well, in the future approval of 139B, well, it has already been approved. We are now discussing the commencement date. She also said that there are no laws governing that. The new laws would be effective. Well, there are regulations because there are lots of colonels in the new territories. We are now saying that we have to revise the situation. If you are now legalizing it now, well, I am afraid that we will reach an impossible situation. The third point I would want to say, Mrs. Zhang said that can you have surprise visits? Well, you cannot do that when it's up there on the 18th floor, because you have to liaise first, because the management would not allow you in. Now, the regulation has been approved. It is now a matter of commencement date only. We can now extend the commencement date, delaying it for a year or two, or according to what Mr. Chen Jichen said, we can delay it until 2047. For me personally, we should repeal it first, and then we do it all over again, whether the animal welfare and the welfare rights how they can be so safeguarded. There is also another mistake from Mrs. Chen. Well, she says that the aunts and ladies, they like dogs and cats. They would like to cross-breeding. Well, this is not an issue. We are now saying that the commercial breeding, the selling of these animals, that is the crux of the matter. Well, in the television debate, there were people debating with me. Well, there would be a shortage of new breeds and high-level breeds. Then prices will rise. Well, animals are not a commodity. Animals are not for sale. The basic law has been quoted to say that dogs and cats are private property, and there lies our different views. Are we going to have a second round of meeting? Chairman, well, if there is a need, then we will discuss the dates of the second meeting. Now, here, we will propose a revision. We feel that we need to have a delay in the commencement date. Now, do I have to propose that in writing? Mrs. Claudia Mo, you can have a personal proposal for amendment, and if you want the subcommittee to have an amendment, I don't think that this is logical. If there is a member proposing revision amendment, then you have to have a subcommittee to discuss the proposal for amendment. So if a member proposes an amendment, then you have to conduct another subcommittee meeting to examine such a proposal. Mr. Chen Chi-Chin, the chairwoman, we have a time limit. The expiry of scrutiny period is the 18th of January. The date of reporting to the House Committee is the 6th of January. We have already extended that once. So there are time constraints, which means that there should be no further discussions, it seems. Now, I'm prepared. I have a repeal motion. We have no quorum here. Do we have a quorum here? Well, 6 is the quorum. We have now the quorum. Now, let me read my proposal and see how you feel. According to the interpretation and general clauses ordinance, according to Cap 34(2), it is said here the animal traders, the commencement date, legal notice, according to the 30th, November 30th, the legal notice has been gazetted as number LN 176/2016. It means that this committee will not discuss it. If that is so, I will make a personal proposal. Would you like to have it? Would you like to have it as a subcommittee proposal? Well, then, if you give us this proposal, then I will photocopy it and distribute it, and we'll decide it here whether that will be a subcommittee proposal. Do you have copies made already? No, these are the originals. I have not made photocopies because I thought that you might have another subcommittee meeting and that we could discuss it at the next subcommittee. Well, just photocopy the first page. Is there a need for it? So I read it once that it is a proposal for repeal. So for this legal notice, you add the word repeal. Would the legal committee support that? Well, this is a proposal to repeal. If by voting we approve it, then the subcommittee will propose such an amendment. If it has not, if this proposal is not met with adoption by this subcommittee, then the matter will rest. Do you need a photocopies? Because there's only one word added to the LN. We add the word repeal. Do we need to read it once again? You have to ring the bell. We have enough quorum here. Well, the secretary knows what I mean. Are you asking for a roll call vote? A division vote?
好，唔好意思啊，想提一提啊，羅冠聰。
I'd like to remind Mr. Nathan Law and Mr. Ho Kai-ming are not members of this subcommittee, so you are not entitled to vote. Mr. Nathan Law and Mr. Ho Kai Ming are not entitled to vote.
咁可能即係同我哋講一講呢一個程序。
係咯，我而家講啦。我而家趁有時間啦。
Since we still have a little bit of time, I'd like to explain the claiming of the decision. I will first invite members who are in favor of the resolution to raise their hands, and then I'll read out the names for the Secretariat to record the names. And after we have read out your names, you can put down your hands, and then I will invite members who vote against the motion to again raise your hands, and then for the names to be recorded, because we can't make use of the electronic voting system here. I want to make sure what we're voting for. Are we supposed to vote in favor of the commencement notice itself or Ms. Claudia Mo's motion? That is Ms. Claudia Mo's amendment. Ms. Claudia Mo's motion to amend. Right, you don't have the name of the mover making this amendment. Please supplement. Because Ms. Claudia Mo has proposed that the subcommittee supports her motion to repeal the commencement notice. So that's the content of the proposed resolution. That is whether the motion should be moved by the subcommittee. All right, time is up. We can proceed to voting now. With those in favor of Ms. Claudia Mo's proposed resolution, please raise your hands. Those in favor, please raise your hands. I'll read out the names. After reading out your name, you may put down your hand. Roy Kwong, Ray Chan. Yes, you can speed it up. Eddie Chu and Chang Chung Tai, Ray Chan. Yes. Those against, please raise your hands. Michael Lok, Rockling Chan, Chen Kin Po, Ann Chang, Lo Chi Chang, Stephen Ho, Gary Chan, Wong Ting Kwong, Holden Chow, Ben Chan, Lau Kwok Fan. Any abstention? No abstention. So, Secretariat, vote count, please. 5 for, 13 against. So the motion is not passed. Any other questions? What is the deadline for moving amendments? Amendments to be moved by members. Mustari Lee, at the electoral meeting on the 7th of December, as chair of the House Committee, moved that the scrutiny period be extended to the 18th of January 2017. So that's the deadline of the scrutiny period, and the expiry of the scrutiny period after extension is the 18th of January. Date of reporting to the House Committee is the 6th of January, and the deadline for giving notice of an amendment to the subsidiary legislation is the 11th of January. So if the subcommittee can complete the scrutiny of the notice today, then we will make a report to the House Committee on the 6th of January. But if we are unable to do that, we will convene another meeting. The Secretariat would like to clarify the vote count. Instead of 13 against, just now 11 members voted against the motion. Any other questions? our legal advisor also has a question. Well, just now, a member asked about surprise checks. In this piece of legislation, the premises may mean private premises, and Article 29 of the Basic Law guarantees protection against entry into private premises. So perhaps on conducting checks and enforcing the law, perhaps the administration can supplement on this. Yes, I'll defer to the AFCD. Dr. Chow. Surprise checks means that the time is not fixed. But if the householder applies for a permit or a license as a licensing condition, the householder must allow us to conduct checks. So when we knock on the door, they must allow us in. I need to go to conference room 1 to vote, so I'll suspend this meeting for 5 minutes.